The abandoned barn. It was a hot summer day, and a group of teenagers were looking for something to do. They had heard rumors about an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town and decided to go check it out. They drove their bikes down the winding dirt road until they came upon the old wooden structure. And as they approached the barn, they noticed that it looked like it hadn't been used in years. The paint was peeling and the roof had holes in it, but there was something intriguing about the place that drew them in. They pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. It was dark and musty, and they could barely see anything, but as their eyes adjusted, they could see strange symbols painted on the walls and the floor. The air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, and they knew that something was not right. As they made their way deeper into the barn, they found strange artifacts, including skulls and bones that looked like they had been used in some kind of ritual. The group became increasingly unnerved and wanted to leave, but they couldn't find their way out. Suddenly, they heard chanting coming from the back of the barn. It was low and guttural, and they knew that they had stumbled upon something sinister. They cautiously made their way towards the sound and found a group of people in robes gathered around an altar. The group soon realized that they had stumbled upon a cult that worshipped a dark deity. They tried to leave quietly, but one of the cult members saw them and started chasing after them. They ran for their lives, jumping over piles of debris and dodging obstacles in their way. They finally made it outside and jumped on their bikes, pedaling as fast as they could. They looked back and saw that the cult members were following them, but they couldn't keep up. They finally made it back to town, gasping for air and relieved to be alive. The group knew that they had to do something about the cult. They reported what they had seen to the authorities, and the police investigated the barn. They found evidence of the cult's activities and arrested several members. But the group of teenagers knew that they could never forget what they had seen in the abandoned barn. They'd come face to face with evil, and it had changed them forever. They knew that they could never take anything for granted and would always be on the look for dangers. The end. The cabin in the woods. The group of friends had been planning their weekend getaway for weeks. They were excited to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and spend some time in a remote cabin in the woods. The cabin was rustic but cozy, with a fireplace, comfortable beds, and a fully stocked kitchen. As they settled in, they realized that the cabin was surrounded by a dense forest. The trees were so thick that the sun struggled to break through the canopy, casting an eerie light on the cabin. The silence was deafening except for the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant sound of an animal. As the night fell, the friends lit a fire and settled in for the evening. They talked, played games, and enjoyed each other's company. But then they started to notice strange noises outside the cabin. At first, it was just a twig snapping or a rustling in the bushes, but then it became louder and more frequent, as if something was circling the cabin. The friends tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a wild animal, but then they saw something moving in the shadows outside the window. It was too big to be a squirrel or a raccoon, and it seemed to be watching them. They gathered around the window, trying to get a better look, but it was too dark to see. Suddenly, they heard a loud banging on the door. It was as if something was trying to break in. The friends panicked, not knowing what to do. They tried to call for help, but there was no cell phone signal in the area. They were completely alone in the woods with no way to escape. The banging on the door grew louder, and they realized that they had to take action. They found a few weapons in the cabin, including a hunting rifle and a knife. They armed themselves and slowly opened the door, ready to face whatever was on the other side. To their horror, they saw a group of creatures staring back at them. They were humanoid, but their skin was gray, their eyes were red, and their teeth were razor sharp. The friends screamed and fired the rifle, hoping to scare them off, but the creatures were too fast and too strong. They broke through the door and attacked the friends, tearing them apart. The cabin in the woods had become their tomb, and their screams echoed through the forest. The creatures disappeared into the night, leaving no trace of their existence. The cabin remained silent, as if nothing had ever happened there. The end. The corn maze. It was a warm autumn afternoon, and a group of friends had decided to explore the corn maze that had popped up on the outskirts of town. The maze was a popular attraction during the fall season, and everyone had heard about it, so they had made plans to visit the maze on this particular day. The group of friends consisted of 4 people: Sarah, Tom, Rachel, and Alex. They were all excited about the adventure that awaited them in the maze. They arrived at the maze, and after paying the entrance fee, they set off to explore the maze. The maze was enormous, with tall corn stalks that towered above their heads. The group began to navigate their way through the maze, and for a while, Everything seemed normal. The corn stalks rustled in the wind, and the occasional scarecrow could be seen in the distance. The group joked and laughed as they made their way deeper into the maze. As they continued to explore the maze, they began to notice that something was not quite right. The corn stalks seemed to move on their own, and the maze started to feel more ominous. The group began to feel uneasy, but they continued on, thinking it was just their imagination. As they turned a corner, they saw a figure in the distance. It was a man, or so they thought. He was standing still, watching them. They started to approach him, but as they got closer, they realized that he was not a man at all. He was made entirely of corn stalks, woven together in a humanoid shape. They were all startled by the sight of it. The group decided to keep moving, and as they did, they encountered more of these cornstalk figures. Some were small, while others were larger, and they all seemed to be watching them. The group was now frightened, and they started to run through the maze, hoping to find their way out. As they ran, they came across a clearing in the maze. In the center of the clearing was a scarecrow, larger than any they had seen before. Its arms were outstretched, and it seemed to be calling out to them. They approached the scarecrow cautiously, and as they got closer, they saw that its face was not a mask, but was made entirely of human skin. The group was now terrified, and they tried to run, but they found themselves trapped. The cornstalk figures had closed in on them, and they were surrounded. The group realized that they were not alone in the maze. They were being watched by something or someone that was not human. Suddenly, the cornstalk figures began to move. They closed in on the group, and the group was sure that they were going to be attacked. But instead of attacking, the figures began to weave themselves around the group, cocooning them in cornstalks. The group was trapped, unable to move or speak. They could hear the sound of cornstalks being woven together on them, creating a tight cocoon. They were left there trapped in the maze, wondering if they would ever escape. Days later, when the group had not returned, their families and friends went to the corn maze to look for them. They found the maze empty, with no sign of their loved ones. The corn maze was closed down shortly after that, and it was said that no one ever went back there again. The maze remained abandoned, a place where no one dared to go. The end. The creature in the fields. The small farming community of Millbrook had always been a peaceful place. But that all changed when the first attack happened. A farmer woke up one morning to find one of his cows had been killed, its body mangled and torn apart. The farmer had never seen anything like it before, and he had no idea what could have done such damage. But it wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next few weeks, more and more livestock were attacked, leaving the farmers in the area on edge. They set up traps and patrols, hoping to catch whatever was responsible for the attacks, but nothing seemed to work. The townspeople started to become afraid. They had no idea what was causing the attacks, and they didn't feel safe on their own properties. Parents were keeping their children inside, and people were reluctant to venture outside at night. The attacks continued to happen, and they started to become more frequent. The townspeople began to wonder if they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Rumors started to spread about a mysterious creature that was lurking in the fields, attacking anything that crossed its path. The town council held an emergency meeting to discuss what could be done about the creature. They brought in experts and hunters from nearby towns to help track down the creature and put an end to the attacks. One night, a group of hunters went out into the fields armed with rifles and searchlights. They tracked the creature to a secluded area of the fields where it had been hiding. As they approached, they could see the creature clearly for the first time. It was a massive bear-like creature with razor-sharp teeth and claws. The hunters tried to shoot it, but their bullets seemed to have no effect. The creature let out a roar and charged at them, sending them running for their lives. The townspeople were terrified. They had no idea what they were dealing with or how to stop it. But one farmer had an idea. He had heard stories from his grandfather about a creature that had been spotted in the area many years ago, and he thought that it might be the same creature that was attacking their livestock. He went to the local library and started researching the creature. After weeks of studying old books and maps, he found a clue. The creature had been spotted in a nearby cave system, and he believed that it might still be living there. The farmer rallied a group of volunteers and set out to the caves. They explored the caves, armed with flashlights and pickaxes. After hours of searching, they finally found the creature sleeping in a dark corner of the cave. They quickly set up traps and managed to catch the creature. They brought it back to town and showed it to the experts who had been brought in to help. They identified it as a rare species of bear that had been thought to be extinct. The town celebrated the capture of the creature, and the attacks on their livestock stopped. The farmers could go back to their daily routines, and the townspeople could feel safe again. But they never forgot the terror that the creature had caused, and they always remained vigilant, watching for any signs of danger in the fields. The end. The Cultist. Ethan had always been fascinated by the occult and the mysterious, so when he heard rumors of a strange cult that had taken over a small rural community, he knew he had to investigate. He packed his bags and drove out to the town, eager to uncover the secrets that lay hidden there. As he walked through the town, he saw strange symbols etched on buildings and heard whispers in the streets. It was clear that something was amiss, and he felt a sense of unease creeping up on him. He finally found his way to the center of the town, where a large building stood ominously. The building was adorned with strange symbols and had a dark, foreboding presence. Ethan cautiously entered the building, not knowing what to expect. Inside, he found a group of people gathered around a large altar, chanting in a language he couldn't understand. He watched in horror as they sacrificed a small animal on the altar, and he knew he had stumbled upon something truly evil. Ethan quickly retreated from the building, but he knew that he couldn't leave the town without getting to the bottom of what was going on. He spent the next few days gathering information, talking to locals, and investigating the cult's activities. As he delved deeper into the community, he realized that the cult's far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. They had infiltrated every aspect of the town, and anyone who tried to expose them was met with violence and intimidation. Ethan knew that he had to act fast if he was going to stop the cult from spreading their evil. He contacted the authorities and provided them with the evidence he had gathered, hoping that they would be able to shut down the cult and save the town from their grasp. But after a lengthy investigation, the authorities finally arrested the cult's leader and dismantled their operations. The town slowly began to recover from the cult's influence, and Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that he had helped bring an end to their reign of terror. But even as he left the town behind, Ethan knew that the memory of the cult and their dark rituals would haunt him for years to come. He had seen things that no one should ever have to witness, and he knew that the evil that had taken hold in the town would always be a part of him. The end. The Ghostly Hitchhiker. It was a dark and stormy night, and the only thing that could be heard was the sound of the rain pelting against the car windows. John was driving down a deserted rural road, trying to find his way back home after a long day at work. He was tired and just wanted to get home, but the rain made it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of him. Suddenly, he saw a figure on the side of the road. It was a young woman, drenched from head to toe and shivering in the cold rain. John felt sorry for her and decided to pull over to offer her a ride. The woman climbed into the car, thanking John for his kindness. She was quiet at first, but as they drove, she started to act strange. She would suddenly burst into tears or start laughing uncontrollably. John tried to ignore it, thinking that she was just upset or maybe a little crazy. As they drove, the woman started to give him directions. They turned down one road after another until John had no idea where they were. The woman seemed to know where she was going, so he trusted her and kept driving. But then he noticed something strange. The woman's clothes were still soaked from the rain, but the seat beneath her was completely dry. It was as if she was a ghost, just a figment of his imagination. John tried to rationalize it, but the more he thought about it, the more he became convinced that the woman was not real. He asked her where she wanted to be dropped off, but she just smiled and told him to keep driving. The car started to swerve, and John realized that they were on a dangerous curve in the road. He tried to regain control, but the car spun out of control and crashed into a tree. When John regained consciousness, he was lying in a hospital bed with a broken leg. He asked the nurses about the woman, but they had no idea what he was talking about. There had been no woman found at the scene of the accident. John realized that he had been tricked by a ghostly hitchhiker, and that he was lucky to have survived the crash. He never forgot the experience and never picked up another hitchhiker again. The end. The Harvest Moon Murders. The town of Millfield was a peaceful place for most of the year. The townspeople were friendly and welcoming, and the scenery was picturesque. However, there was one night of the year that the town was plagued by fear and terror, the night of the harvest moon. But for as long as anyone could remember, On the night of the harvest moon, a series of brutal murders would occur throughout the town. The killer was never caught, and every year the townspeople would lock themselves indoors in fear, hoping that they wouldn't be the next victim. The local police department had never been able to solve the case, and every year they would issue warnings to the townspeople to stay indoors and lock their doors. But this year, something was different. This year, the killer had come for someone specific. You were a newcomer to the town of Millfield, having moved there only a few months prior. You had heard the stories about the Harvest Moon murders but had never believed that they were true. That was until the night of the Harvest Moon arrived, and you found yourself the target of the killer. It was late in the evening, and you were sitting in your living room when you heard a noise outside. At first, you didn't think much of it, assuming it was just the wind or an animal, but the noise persisted, growing louder and more persistent until you could no longer ignore it. You stood up from your chair and made your way to the window, peering out into the darkness. That was when you saw him, a figure dressed in all black, wearing a hood to conceal his face. He was staring directly at your window, and as soon as he saw you, he began to move closer. Panic set in as you realized that you were the next target of the Harvest Moon murder. You quickly locked all the doors and windows, hoping to keep him, but it was no use. He was already inside the house. You could hear him moving through the rooms, his footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. You tried to stay quiet, hoping that he would think no one was home, but it was no use. He found you hiding in the closet, and that was when the real terror began. The killer was unlike anything you had ever seen before. He was cold and calculating, and he seemed to enjoy playing with his victims before finally taking their lives. He toyed with you, moving in and out of the shadows, whispering threats in your ear. You tried to fight back, but he was too strong. He overpowered you easily, and before you knew it, you were lying on the ground, bleeding and broken. The last thing you saw before everything went dark was the harvest moon shining through the window, a bright red glow illuminating the killer's face. The town of Millfield never recovered from the terror of the Harvest Moon murders. The killer was never caught, and every year, the townspeople would lock themselves indoors, praying that they wouldn't be the next victim. You were just another name on the long list of victims, a tragic end to a cute short by the evil that lurked in the town every year on the night of the Harvest Moon. The end. The Haunted Farmhouse. It was a crisp autumn day when the Smith family pulled up to the old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It was a fixer-upper, but it was all they could afford. They had moved to the countryside, hoping to start a new life, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The farmhouse was large, with a wraparound porch and a big yard. It was the perfect place for their two kids to run around and play. The family was excited to start renovating the house and making it their own. As they began to settle in, strange things started to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, and they could hear footsteps in the hallways when no one was there. The family tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old house settling. But things got worse. The family would wake up in the middle of the night to find their belongings move around, and they could hear whispering in there. They would also see shadows moving around the house. The kids were scared, and the parents were worried. They had never experienced anything like this before. They started to research the history of the farmhouse, and what they found shocked them. The previous owners had all left within a year of moving in, and there were rumors that the house was haunted by the spirits of its former inhabitants. The family didn't know what to do, but they couldn't afford to move out. They decided to stay and try to make peace with the spirits. They brought in a medium who confirmed that the house was indeed haunted. The spirits of the former inhabitants were angry and confused, and they were lashing out at the new family. The medium suggested that they try to communicate with the spirits to try and understand their grievances. The family tried talking to the spirits, but it only seemed to make things worse. The spirits became more aggressive, and the family started to fear for their safety. One night, things came to a head. The family was sitting in the living room when a vase flew off the shelf and shattered on the ground. The family knew they had to get out of the house, but they were trapped. The doors wouldn't open, and the windows were sealed shut. The family huddled together in fear, hoping that the spirits would leave them alone, but they didn't. The spirits continued to lash out, and the family could feel the cold breath of the spirits on their necks. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the spirits dissipated. The family was shaken but relieved. They knew they couldn't stay in the house any longer. The next day, the family packed up and left the farmhouse. They never looked back. But they knew that the spirits would always be there, waiting for their next victims. The farmhouse remained empty for years, a place where no one dared to venture, a place that was forever haunted. The end. The Lost Village. A group of 5 hikers set out on a weekend trip to explore a remote section of the forest. They had heard rumors of an abandoned village deep in the woods and were determined to find it. After several hours of hiking, they came across a clearing with a few old, dilapidated buildings. Excited at the prospect of discovering the lost village, they pressed on. The buildings were covered in vines and moss, and the streets were overgrown with weeds. The hikers felt as though they had stepped back in time, as though they were the first people to see the village in centuries. They explored the empty buildings, finding old tools, furniture, and clothing, but no signs of recent habitation. The hikers couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but they brushed it off as just their imaginations running wild. As they were about to leave, one of the hikers, Sarah, noticed something strange. "Hey guys, look at this," she called out. "There's a building over here. Wasn't here before." The others rushed over to see what she was talking about. Sure enough, there was a small building that hadn't been there when they first arrived. It was made of old rotting wood and had a sign over the door that read the oracle. Curiosity getting the better of them, the hikers opened the door and stepped inside. The room was empty except for an old wooden table and a crystal ball in the center. As they were examining the crystal ball, it began to glow with an eerie blue light. Suddenly, the hikers were engulfed in a blinding flash, and when they opened their eyes, they were no longer in the lost village. Instead, they found themselves in a place that was both familiar and foreign. They were in a bustling city, surrounded by skyscrapers and neon lights. Confused and disoriented, the hikers tried to make sense of their surroundings. After wandering the city for hours, they found a newspaper with the date on it. It was 30 years in the future from when they had entered the lost village. They had sometime traveled through the crystal ball in the oracle's building. They tried to figure out how to get back to their own time. The hikers realized that the lost village was more than just a forgotten place in the forest. It was a portal to other times and dimensions, and they had stumbled upon it by accident. They spent weeks trying to find a way back, but to no avail. Eventually, they accepted their fate and settled into their new lives in the future city. The lost village remained a mystery, a place that was beyond the understanding of the world they had left behind. The end. The Scarecrow. John was a farmer who lived on a small farm on the outskirts of town. He had been working the land for years, and he knew how to protect his crops from crows. He had always used scarecrows to keep the pesky birds away, but this year he decided to create something new. He spent hours in his workshop, piecing together the perfect scarecrow. He gave it a face made of burlap and old clothes for its body. When he was finished, he placed it in the middle of his field, confident that it would keep the crows away. The first few days were uneventful, and John was pleased with his creation. But as the days passed, strange things started happening on the farm. The scarecrow seemed to be moving around the field at night, and John would find it in different places every morning. And at first, he thought it was just the wind, but then he started to notice other strange things happening. His crops were being trampled, and there were strange footprints in the mud. He knew that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. One night, John decided to stay up and watch the scarecrow. He sat in his truck, watching the field with binoculars. As he watched, he saw the scarecrow come to life. It moved its arms and legs, and it started to walk around the field, and couldn't believe what he was seeing. And the next day, John went to the local library to do some research. He found a book about ancient folklore, and he learned about the legend of the scarecrow. According to the book, John realized that he had created a monster, and he had to find a way to stop it. He went back to his workshop and created a new scarecrow, one that was smaller and less intimidating. He hoped that the new scarecrow would be enough to appease the other. That night, John went out to the field with the new scarecrow. He placed it next to the old one and hoped for the best. As he was walking back to his truck, he heard a loud noise coming from the field. He turned around and saw that the old scarecrow had come to life and was attacking the new one. John knew he had to act fast. He grabbed a pitchfork and ran towards the field. He stabbed the old scarecrow, hoping to destroy it. As he did, he felt a strange energy coming from the scarecrow. It let out a piercing scream and then collapsed to the ground. John knew that he had done the right thing. He buried the old scarecrow and never spoke of it again. The new scarecrow remained in the field. doing its job of scaring away the crows. But John knew that he would always be wary of scarecrows from that day forward. He had learned the hard way that sometimes the things we create can take on a life of their... At the end,